Welcome to Down the Garden Path. Today I'm welcoming back our friend and fellow gardener from across the GTA. Julia Dimakos is joining me again today to talk all about tomatoes and to not be afraid to how to grow tomatoes. So I'm so excited to learn from her. She's also known as the Gardening Girl in her 7,000 square foot kitchen garden located in Mono, Ontario, on 25 acres on the Niagara Escarpment. So welcome back to the show, Julia.
Thanks again for having me. I'm so happy to be back. I
Oh,
love
you're
chatting.
welcome. You're welcome. We were chatting a few weeks ago about regret, and like I hadn't started my tomatoes yet, and you said you hadn't either, and that we shouldn't be afraid. And they're the people that are starting to talk about tomatoes in February, really, they're the that's the risky part, and that even though it's May 3rd, as the time of this recording, you can still start tomatoes from seed inside your house, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Last year I started my tomatoes end of March and I thought I'm going to be ahead of the game and I'm going to
Hmm.
start them. This time last year, my tomatoes were so unruly. They were at least a foot and a half tall, dying to get out of their smaller pots. I didn't have the space. I grew 108 varieties. And dealing with that size of plant, knowing I still had 4 more weeks to go, was so stressful. And by the end of it, they were just not happy. So when I
Mm.
transplanted them to the garden, they had a long transition. So I decided that this year I was going to wait and start them later to put out smaller, stronger plants so that when I put them in the garden, they won't have such a hard time adjusting because
Yeah.
that size plant already wants to flower and set down fruit. And I wasn't ready for that. It didn't have the
Hmm.
support of the ground or the soil. So yeah, so this year I just started them the couple of Saturdays ago now, I think it's been.
Yeah.
And I'm still waiting for 10 of them to germinate. So
Okay.
19 have, I'm growing 29 varieties, and 19 have germinated, which are great. They're not yet at the first leaf stage.
Okay.
And I've got 10 more to go, and I'm honestly not worried. I have years ago, because you're always thinking like, oh shoot, I forgot to start this. So then
Hmm.
I would start them later and later, just adding more varieties, and they all did really well. As soon as I get to the garden, they just pick up and start
Yeah.
growing. So I didn't find that the ones that started late didn't produce while the first ones did. They all eventually reached the same growth stage. So it was
Right.
fine.
Yeah.
I know it's possible.
Yes. And I think you're right. The issues that can, if you start too early, there's so many more issues, right? Of like you said, the space and the size and keeping them healthy, and they're still going to lean towards light and leggy, so I think you think you're starting early is better, but I think and sometimes because I think a lot of times then people don't do it again because it was so much work, right?
Much work. I think in the situation where if you have a really small garden or you only plan on growing, 2 to 4 pots of tomatoes and you're growing nothing else and you plan on growing them and you're going to put them in a big grow bag and you want to start them early because you want fruit early, but that's all you're doing. Like that's your garden
Yeah.
and you're ready to commit the effort, the time, the care, supporting, staking, managing them. I think by all means, like if that's what you want to do, great. But if you have other things in your garden and a life and you might not get to them on time and
Yeah.
they're really needy when they start getting bigger. It's a lot easier to manage them when they're growing in their final destination than indoors in the transition stage. Unless you
Yes.
can do that, I suggest for most people not to. I
Yeah.
suggest, you have don't fall victim to seeing what other people do online because everyone too is in a different growing zone and everyone has a different final frost date if they have a frost date. If you're watching people online that are in the south, they're already growing them in their gardens.
Yeah.
So the pressure of feeling like, well, I haven't started them yet, I'm really falling behind. You're not. Just
Yeah.
rest assured, there is no rush with tomatoes. They grow fast. I give them 4 weeks now. I think 4 to 5 weeks is a good date for seed
Hmm.
starting your tomatoes. They will catch up and you'll have a lot more pleasant experience in managing them than managing something that's hip height, which was mine last year. They were hip height,
Yes.
tangling, and they were stuck together, falling over. I mean, it was a nightmare. So
Yeah, yeah. I think
yeah,
you posted pictures about that, didn't you? And I think I remember
yes.
that. Yeah. So,
Of hip height tomato plants
yeah.
growing in 4 to 6 inch pots. It was a nightmare. It was
Yes.
awful. Yeah.
Yes. So
Not again.
now speaking of the pot size, so I was just saying that I grow them in, I save the plastic mushroom containers from mushrooms, and that's what I used. So I've just started them about 2 weeks ago when we were chatting about this, and I thought, yay, I'm not behind. I can do it. So I set it up in the dining room so I didn't forget about it, so I could keep an eye on them. And I was very careful to like consciously space the tomato plants like in spaces, but you said you don't necessarily need to do that.
No, you could literally drop two seeds in a hole and split them apart later. They're really resilient. Once they grow to, past the cotyledon stage, once they grow
Hmm.
past, the baby leaf stage and the stem thickens a bit and they produce their first set of true leaves, the stems are a lot tougher. And at that point you can manage them. You don't have to worry about trying to separate them. They can handle it. They're not
Okay.
that fragile and they don't mind being transplanted. They don't have any issue with root disturbance. So yeah, but by spacing them the way you did make it easier for yourself. If you were to throw them all in a hole, you'd have a harder time tangling them apart. Whereas the way that you did it, you can literally take a little spoon, like a baby
Right.
spoon,
Yeah.
and then just scoop them out one by one and plop them right into a planting hole in your next size pot. So what you've done is good. And I really like, so what it sounds like what you did is you multi-sowed. You took a container, which you used a mushroom box, but that's basically a seed tray, right?
Yeah.
You took a container and you put the seeds in there of the seeds you're growing, and then later on you're going to pot them up. So that's exactly what I do, but I do it in a 4-inch pot or a 3-inch pot, and I just put all the seeds of one variety in one pot, and then later I split them apart from here. So what you did
Okay.
is perfect. Yeah.
Perfect. And you said four you find in that size pot, four is sufficient, but you could do more if you want to for our listeners, but
Do
four.
100. You could do 100 in here. You could do 50 in here if you wanted to. You could just, put them all carefully if you wanted, and later on when they grow, you could split them apart. I like to start them in. So we were talking before about, a lot of people that are beginner gardeners, they go to the garden center or they go to, Home Depot and they buy the tray, like the seed starting tray, and it
Yes.
has a pink tray and it has little cell packs in there, whether they're 6s or 9s, and then they have a dome, right? And so then they
Hmm.
take their seed pack and they fill the trays with soil, and then they put their one seed per cell, and now that's fine. The problem is that seed germination is tricky. It's not a 100% guarantee. If you have fresh seeds, maybe the ones you saved yourself, those probably have the highest germination rate. And so, most likely if you put the seed in, the seed will germinate. But oftentimes when you buy seeds, you don't know what you're going to get. So if you fill your tray one per cell, you may not get every cell germinating a tomato plant. So then you're going to have holes. So it's a
Hmm.
lot of effort to manage that, and soil and watering. So by taking a pot, if you're, one little pot per variety, you know exactly how many you're going to have, then you select. So by doing it this way, I know that I'm going to pick, if I want to grow 4, then there's 4 in here, I'll pick all 4. But if I want to pick like 2 of the best, then I would probably go for the 2 strongest seedlings in this pot. And then I would discard the rest
Okay.
or give them to someone. But
Yeah.
then I'm selecting, right? So you want to grow strong plants, you want to select the best seedlings. And sometimes when you seed one seed per cell, you might get a really piddly weakling. You don't want to grow that seed. That plant may be diseased later. It may be
Mm.
susceptible to weather, pests, anything. And so by selecting the strongest, you're giving yourself higher odds of success,
Yeah.
higher chances.
The one thing I find about those big seed trays is it's hard to keep the water even, like, evenly watering that. Like that's why I kind of like my little mushroom container, because I feel like I can evenly, make sure all six of mine, I did six in my little container,
Nice.
um, you know, is watered enough. But when you're dealing with that big tray and you're trying to water, it's tricky. You do end up drowning some and drying out others, right?
But I'll give you a tip. I'll give you
Okay.
a seedling watering tip.
Okay.
Never water your seedlings from the top. If
Ah,
you're growing in containers that have drainage holes, it's best to water from below.
okay.
So what I do is I have a tray, like a large plastic tray that I have about, half an inch of water in, that I top into that. I top up. I add my liquid fertilizer if I'm going to do it. I put it right into that tray. It's all mixed. And then I set my little pots or little seed packs or what have you,
Okay.
cell packs into that, and they wick the moisture from below evenly. So when you pull it up, it's all, you can see that it's damp on the top. You feel it. It feels like it's got some
Hmm.
mass to it. and then
Okay.
it's fully watered. And by doing that too, you're not, I know what you mean. If you try to water, you're going to make a well,
Yeah.
right? It's going to like the soil will disappear. It'll make it uneven. So by doing it that way, you're getting uneven watering, and also you're preventing dampening off. Damping off is when there's the
Uh,
disease in the stem at the base. And
okay.
by doing it that way, you help to prevent that too.
Okay. You know, what's funny is that when I first did them, I did that. Because I put all my little mushroom, I did poke holes, even though they're mushroom containers, I did poke holes in them, and I put water in the tray. And then I don't know what, but then I got a spray because I didn't want to do the well, so I got a spray bottle. So I've been spraying the soil, but it's like I almost forgot that I'm in a tray and I could just water from the bottom. So thank you for remembering that, reminding
And
me of
then
that.
too, like, you can get carpal tunnel just trying to
Yeah. Oh,
spray,
exactly.
spray. And how much water comes out of a spray? Like, you're not going to reach the bottom of those roots.
Yeah.
You're only going to water the top layer, and the bottom will all be dry. And then you'll have to water more often because it'll dry really fast. And plus, the roots are not going to learn to grow down. They're going to grow up because they're in search of that water. So you're better off watering from the bottom. You're also encouraging those roots to grow downwards in search of
Down.
it.
Okay. Perfect. And
Yeah.
that goes not just for tomatoes, but other things. I'm growing a few
Everything.
flowers. I'm growing those container zucchinis that you recommended a few years ago. Is Asante? Are they
Yeah. Yeah. Ask.
Asia?
Yeah.
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 So
Renee's
they're
favorite
doing
seed.
great actually. So yeah, so I've got a tray. I limited myself to one big, the tray that I put all my containers on that I could manage. So, I
Good.
want our listeners to really know that at the beginning of May, you are not too late,
Yep.
especially because yes, you can wait a couple more weeks and get tomato plants from the grocery store, or from your local garden center, but you're going to get the basic tomato plants, right? There's not going to be a ton of variety, and that's okay if that's what you want. But the advantage of seeds is you can really get some unique varieties.
Agreed. Absolutely. And from, I grow a lot of varieties too that come from directly from breeders, from tomato
Mm.
breeders. So like this one here is called Tundra, and it's from a breeder out of Western Canada. Her name is Karen Olivier. Northern Gardener is her handle on Instagram.
Oh,
And
okay.
her tomatoes are probably the best tomatoes I've ever had in my life.
Wow.
She breeds the most delicious, succulent, perfect, beautiful tomatoes I've ever seen or tasted. She's known around the world, Karen Olivier. She is amazing. So you can, reach out to her, and you can order seeds from her, or you can buy her seeds from, seed companies that then sell them later.
Right. Right.
And but so that you'll never find her seeds in the garden center. You'll never find them in a seed packet, and you'll never find them on the shelf, as a seedling.
Right.
You're never
You're
gonna
never
find
going to do
those
that. Yeah.
varieties.
I think I'll reach out to her to be a guest on the show. So I'll have to follow up as well. So that's good.
Yeah, she's amazing. And the way she explains how she brings them, what she looks for. So it's very interesting.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
good. So let's talk about next steps. So we've got our seedlings growing. You say to wait for the second leaf, the true leaf, before
Yeah.
so is that when you would then put one in that 4-inch pot, or would you put one in a 6-inch pot? Let's break it down
Okay.
like really basic
So,
for,
okay. So you're not going to move them. So they're fine in here. Like this is my pot. And let's say you had it in a cell tray. That's
yeah.
fine. If you prefer to use, like one of these things, you can. So
Okay.
that's fine. But I like this. I've actually, side note, a cell tray like this is a different plant. I put all varieties in one of these, and that was fine. In a
Okay.
tiny cell.
Yeah.
But before you would then remove it from there, it's easier to do so when they've started developing their first true leaf. So this is the cotyledon leaf, the baby leaf, and the stem is really delicate. So I could, if I wanted to, if you have gentle hands and you're very careful and you don't touch the stem, you can literally, separate them with a little spoon or little dibber or widger and set them into the next size pot carefully without touching any part, just by the root itself, and then pushing the soil around it. You can. But if you're not delicate and your hands are, fumbly,
Mhm.
I would suggest you can wait till the first true leaf starts to develop. And mine is just starting to show. But once it emerges, then you can split them up. And then the next size, you can go into a 4-inch pot, or you can go into a pot this size, which is about a 3-inch pot.
Okay.
You can definitely go to that size. I would not recommend moving it from this size, like this size tiny plant, into a 1 gallon,
Ah, right.
because the reason why is because there's a lot of water and a lot of soil in that bigger size container. And if you overwater, you can kill your seedling, because it's too heavy with water. It's too wet, it's too
Mm.
damp. and it can cause disease and cause it to dampen off and just kill it.
Okay.
Plants do better in a smaller container than they do floating and swimming in a large one.
Okay.
So in that case, I would suggest, go to the next size, go 4 inch. 4 inch is perfect. And then
Yeah.
if you're started them early and they still have time, like they could be okay in a 4 inch pot till they need to go to the garden, because at this time of year, our final frost date here is towards the end of this month. So it's by that point, I won't need to go up higher. But if I started
Right.
them in March, I would have to pot them up, and then I would pot them up then you can go to a gallon. So from a
Right.
4 inch to a gallon, it's fine, or 12 inch.
Hmm.
But don't go directly from, your little tiny seedling directly into a big pot or a
Yeah.
grow bag. It would not survive in there. It would not grow well. It would be
Yeah.
stunted.
Yeah, for sure. And when we go to the garden center in a couple of months or a couple of weeks, they tend to be in 4 inch pots, or even the cell packs, right? The 6 cell
Yeah.
packs. So so yes, they you shows you can do it the same at home.
Yep.
Um, and so what stage do you start fertilizing? Like, have you fertilized the one that you're showing us? So we are recording as a podcast, but also a video. So Julia's been able to show me some things.
Yep.
So yeah.
So, okay. Great question, by the way. So the baby leaf, the cotyledon leaf, contains this. So this is the original leaf, right, that comes out of the seed coat. And that little leaf has all the nutrients that the plant needs in order to produce its first true leaf. So,
Okay.
but while you see it green, that
Hmm.
means that it's feeding the plant, the root system. When the next set of leaves begins, the first true leaf, and this little leaf starts turning yellow and brown and dying, that means that it's used up all its nutrition. It's no longer needed for the plant. At that point, you can start fertilizing. So if you
Oh,
fertilize
perfect.
now, you don't need to. You'd probably potentially even burn it. You're better off waiting. And once that little cotyledon leaf starts to fall off and the new, then that would only happen after the first true leaf develops.
Okay.
Then I would fertilize. And I would only fertilize, I do a little bit. I try not to overdo it because you can burn your seedlings
Hmm.
and set them back. And you can see it on the leaves. The leaves will look like something happened, and then they become burnt
Okay.
and browned and dying. So a little bit, very diluted, in my basin or in a liter bottle or 2 liter bottle. I like to use the Pro Mix liquid, the root booster.
Okay.
It the phosphorus is the higher number, the NPK. The P is higher, which focuses the nutrition on developing roots. So it's called Promix Root Booster. I don't remember the exact ratio right now, but that's the one that I like. And I put like half a capful in a huge container. And there's
Okay.
the directions are on the bottle. I do that once a week. And I do
Once a
that
week.
with pretty much most of the seedlings that I have for the garden, vegetables and flowers, and they
Yeah.
really help produce strong roots. And then, the plant continues to grow from there.
Yes. I
That's
think
it.
that's great to know about that, because I think people, I know I would think that when the early leaves start turning brown, I would think I've done something wrong and that I've killed it. So that's good to know that if you see that not to be worried, wait for that's supposed to happen. And so that is great information, Julia.
Thank you. And that applies to anything, to any flowers, to any vegetable plant that has a cotyledon. The cotyledon is just there to feed the plant until it produces the first true leaf, and then it dies.
Excellent.
Yeah.
I mean, we've done a number of shows on growing vegetables, and I don't remember that information. And I think that's really important, because I think we've all thrown away something thinking it didn't isn't doing well. So that's great
Yeah.
to know. So that is a perfect tip. So next thing I wanted to ask you, that even despite the many shows I've done on tomatoes, is that all tomatoes aren't equal, right? We have our cherry tomatoes and our grape tomatoes. And then, but the bigger classification is determinate and indeterminate.
Right.
And it's important to know, right? It's important to know which one you have.
Right. So in my garden, I grow primarily indeterminates. And the reason I do that is because I have the trellising system already in place. So it
Hmm.
makes me to grow. And if I have a really tall trellis, I'd rather grow something that will be vining and I could attach to it, which will produce a constant flow. And what with an indeterminate, the tomatoes come in over the season, so I'm not getting a full flush at once. I'm getting, truss by truss by truss, or large tomato by large tomato. So it's spaced out. And so that's how I prefer it. It makes it more manageable for me. A determinate variety is a bushing type. It does not have a vine or a cordon. It grows to a maximum height. On the seed packet or the description online, you will see, a determinate tomato will grow up to 1 to 2 feet or 3 to 4 or 6, but it's got a maximum height. And then usually with the indeterminate too, you don't remove any suckers. So suckers happen, with a vining, indeterminate tomato, it keeps making new suckers, which become new branches and new entire stems if you leave them, and the plant is like a monster. So you
Right.
have to move them in order to focus all concentration and growth on 1 or 2 main stems. Makes it a lot easier to manage. Otherwise, it would be sprawling on the floor. And in nature, when they're the wild tomatoes would be ones that just sprawl on the ground and they become like a giant mound, and that's fine. That's where it comes from. But for the garden, it's hard to manage something that is going to be crawling on the ground. And it can be susceptible to diseases and pests and insects.
Yeah.
And so that's what we do in indeterminate. But a determinate, you want to not remove any suckers because it grows to a maximum height. So every branch is needed,
Okay.
and all the fruit come in at once, and then it's over. So many determinants are a shorter season variety. You can get determinants that are 55, 65 days. And once they produce all their fruit, they're basically done. So then you can harvest it all and then cut down the plant. And that's how they typically work. That's a determinate versus indeterminate. Then
Okay.
there's also things like dwarfs and
Mm-hmm.
micro dwarfs,
Mm-hmm.
and they can be usually you have to read the description of how tall they'll become. And there are many dwarf varieties that are created. There's the dwarf tomato project, which if you don't have the space to grow an indeterminate, 12-foot tall, 7-foot tall plant, they have similar large tomatoed varieties in a compact size, and that'll be different too. And I don't think you would take off the suckers of that.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, because they're dwarfs. And then I want to say one more thing. Micro dwarfs are tiny, tiny. So those I start indoors early because I grow them in the winter and then I put them out in the garden. But I have about 6 micro dwarfs and they're this big and they already have fruit forming.
Oh,
So
wow.
that one's different. Like they're not unruly. So
Yeah.
that's,
Yeah. Well, that's good.
yeah.
And the benefit of having a garden room greenhouse kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
So my question was about grape tomatoes and cherry tomatoes.
What was the question?
Are they determinate or indeterminate, or could they be both? Like
They can be
depending on
both.
the variety.
You have to read the label. So you're
Okay.
growing yellow pear
Yes.
cherries, they're
Hmm.
indeterminate, and they will require staking and
Okay.
also removing the suckers in order to keep them manageable.
Excellent. Okay. Good to know. But I can grow them in a pot, like
You can
in
grow
a
them in
large
a pot
pot, but still have
with
to
the
stake it.
trellis. Yes, exactly.
Okay. Okay.
But they don't think they grow to be like 7 feet, 8 feet tall. I think that they are a shorter indeterminate.
Yes. I
But
know they
maybe
were
grow.
very good producers though from when I tried them before, when I first got them from you. And so this time I'm only growing that one, and yeah, they were very good. But I've
One
been
thing,
hesitant to grow an indeterminate like large tomato because of the maintenance of it. But I think as long as I have the system set up, it doesn't necessarily mean it's more maintenance, right?
right, so exactly. So here's the difference. Here's a little tip too. So I use cattle panel. So my trellises are all cattle panel, cow
Okay.
panels. They're metal, and they're supported by T stakes, and they're in a permanent position. I don't remove them. So whether I'm growing a beefsteak or a large tomato or a cherry, I still have to follow the same principles in terms of staking them and removing suckers. But with cherry tomatoes, you get a lot bigger harvest over the season because you're producing trusses of fruit, and each truss has a lot of fruit on it. So it takes a lot less energy for the plant to ripen them and, produce the fruit for your harvest. So you get a lot larger harvest. If you're growing a large tomato variety, you don't get as many fruit. It takes a
Okay.
long time to ripen them. They're usually much longer season for tomatoes,
Hmm.
100 days, 95 days, more than
Yeah.
that. And then, you're not going to get as many. And they're also a lot more disease susceptible because of how long it takes for them to ripen and all the energy it takes to produce them, that by the
Yeah.
time they start ripening, late blight may be rolling into your garden and you may have already lost it because, each tomato takes so long to ripen, to develop into the size, and then to ripen it, that you wouldn't have enough time for your plant to recover. But cherries are different because cherry tomatoes, even if you get blight, if as long as I don't personally remove anything once I see blight. I don't touch the plant because I don't want to spread it. And I know there's people that suggest cutting down your plant and then bagging it, but that disruption of the spores will cause your blight to travel. So
Oh,
actually,
okay.
I don't come near it. I don't touch it. Like I don't fiddle with it, nothing. But then where we live, we always have a beautiful September. So August may be a wet month, coolish at night. And suddenly we have we have summer again in September, and all of September will be stunning. That month, I find all those cherry tomato plants that had succumbed or have shown signs of blight, that maybe the bottom was affected. Those plants continue to grow, and they just produce and produce until frost. So it doesn't matter if I had touched them or cut them, I would lose them. So if you
Right.
grow cherries, they're a really great guarantee that you will have fruit. If you grow larger tomatoes, it's a risk. So I always try to grow both types. So I always have a
Mm-hmm.
fallback and
Yeah.
still manage to get a harvest of tomatoes at the end.
Yeah. Because we are at risk of the summer, right? If we have a good July, hot July, cool August, like you said,
Yeah.
and yeah, everybody will see all those posts of people with tons of tomatoes in September that are green, but their tomato plants are full of plants or full of tomatoes, but they're green, and how do I ripen them and that type of thing. So yeah. Okay. Well, that's good. Well, I will stick with my cherry tomatoes, I think. My
Definitely get a good crop. But there's
yes.
lots of other great cherries out there you could try that are fun and will produce lots for you.
Okay.
So, maybe next year, Joanne, you can be open to trying something new. Another one, maybe one
Yes.
more.
Yes, I think one more for sure. I think I used because I bought the yellow and the pink ones from you, and I think I used all the pink ones last time, so I had yellow left over because I wasn't
Okay.
sure. Yellow
Yeah.
tomato. So I planted few of, so then I still had more in the package, so that's why I went all out on your tomatoes because the yellow ones were pear shaped, were so good.
They're so
So
good and so cute, and they look great on the plate, don't they, when you
they
bring them in?
do.
And
Yeah.
they're just so nice, and you don't really find them very often in the grocery store. You have to go to the market to find them.
Yeah.
So they're such a nice novelty to have. But maybe next year you could do Gardener's Delight. That's one of my favorite.
And what kind is that?
So that's a red tomato. It's like a saladette, it's called. It's a cherry, but it's a larger cherry. It's like that Campari. You know, the ones they sell in the grocery store?
Oh,
8 in a
yes.
clamshell for $6. That's the one. So that is prolific. It grows really tall and it produces and produces. And even on a blighty year, it still produces because it always outgrows the blight and it keeps growing. And I end up freezing bags and bags of them at the end of
Really?
the season. And then if once you thaw a frozen tomato, the skin just pops right off, and then
Yeah.
it makes a sauce. So I recommend Gardener's Delight next year.
Okay. Well,
I
I
have
flagged that
the
down. So yeah.
I have the seeds, so
Do you? Okay,
to
perfect.
find them.
Perfect.
Yes. Yes.
Um, so what else any other tips that you think people don't know? So okay, we're now into June and they're in the garden. Um, do we how do you prefer to amend the soil before you plant them a certain way or
Good question. So first of all, wait till after the final frost date has passed, and I would give it a few extra days. Just watch that 2-week forecast. Do not rush planting them into the garden because a frost will kill them or stunt them if it didn't kill them.
Mhm.
Even if you cover them, you can cover them, but a cold will stunt them. So they're going to have a harder time recovering. You're better off just waiting and putting them into nice warm soil that has no risk of any kind of cooling. They're good up
Okay.
until about 10 degrees, and then lower than that, they can start getting stunted. So, that delayed growth does affect a short growing season. So that's number one. Choose a full sun location. Soil should be well draining. That's number two. Full
Okay.
afternoon sun, so at least 6 to 8 hours of full afternoon sun. They love heat, but they also, for southern people in the south, they will drop their flowers over 30 degrees. So
Mm,
they're like heat, but they don't like scorching heat because they will
yeah.
just in order to survive, they just drop their flowers. So you'll have it's called bud blast.
Oh,
So
that sounds like a video game.
yeah, right. So that's number one. So then when I plant them, you like to use fertile soil. My soil is well draining, like I mentioned, and I never plant tomatoes where I planted tomatoes last year because tomatoes are
Rotating.
Yeah, they're heavy feeders. And they also, once they get late blight, I wouldn't want to put a tomato back in where there was late blight because I don't want to make it susceptible in case something was left over. No, I'm not sure about the specific science, but I still think that you should rotate out of something like that. Like I
Mhm.
wouldn't put potatoes where there was potato blight. Like I had a bed of that last year. So that's going to be off limits for years. Anyway, so when I plant my tomatoes, I dig my hole and I amend the soil with a all-purpose organic fertilizer. It's granular. I like Gaia's Green. Their all-purpose fertilizer is a 4:4:4 ratio. It's just perfect. I do a tablespoon of that in the planting hole. And then I also get like volcanic ash, volcanic minerals, and I do tablespoons of that. That's really great for the microbes in the soil, the minerals in the soil. And then what else would I add? And then I like to make it nice and juicy in there. So then maybe like a tablespoon of worm castings, like
Mhm.
whatever I have,
Yeah.
carbonatite, like I put that in the soil. And then I water the soil, the hole, because I want it to be deeply watered so the water is at the bottom, especially if your soil is dry. So I water that hole deeply. So I basically take my hose or my watering wand and I fill the hole with soil, so which also helps to dilute all those fertilizers. Then I pop the plant into that hole and then I close the hole.
Okay.
And that's how
Perfect.
I plant them. And they're nice and stable. And then that way also they don't have time, they don't need to struggle as they try to adapt into the soil because they're already nice and wet and they're, in a nice environment. And the next
Mhm.
day they're not looking limp, they're looking healthy and happy in
Yeah.
that spot.
Well, that's good.
Yeah.
Okay. Blossom end rot. That's when the bottom of the tomato goes black, right?
Yes. Yes.
And that seems to be, I know I've been affected by it. Yeah, what do you do in that situation? Or is there a way to prevent that from happening? Or is that just, luck of the draw?
Okay, so blossom end rot, a lot of people think it's because there's not enough calcium in the
Yes.
soil, which is not why it happens. It happens because calcium cannot be absorbed into the cell walls of the plant because
Mhm.
there's inconsistent watering. So
Ah,
the only way you'll know if your soil is lacking calcium is if you do a soil test and then you will see what your soil is lacking and what it has. But I don't do a soil test and I feel I don't need to because I feed my soil with compost and all the amendments and it's healthy. There's rich with microbes and worms and all kinds of things. So what I do is as long as you maintain consistent watering, you make sure that the soil doesn't become hydrophobic where it like shrinks back from the sides of the bed. You will see when this happens, right? It's like it's
hmm.
shrinking. Soil like that causes blossom end rot because even though there could be calcium in that soil, even if you add calcium to the soil. If the plant cannot absorb water into its roots, it cannot absorb calcium. So
Okay.
when it doesn't absorb calcium, it develops blossom end rot. That is the sign. In order to get that to stop or prevent it once you have it, you just should remove your tomatoes that you see that happening to because they will never ripen properly and you don't want to eat that. I mean, you can cut it off, but it's not pleasant. So just then start watering your soil,
Okay.
until it's, watered well. And a good rain helps, but if you don't have any rain, you want to make sure you're watering that soil every day until you see the soil is back to normal, moist soil. And
Hmm.
it takes a while for a plant to recover once it's gotten the blossom end rot because you'll see every fruit for a long time will
Yeah.
start developing it. Even if it looks perfect at first, it'll still show you a little bit of black at the end.
The bottom,
It
yeah.
just starts coming. So it takes a while, but the way to prevent it is by watering
Watering. That's
regularly with the
great
rain.
information because I think there's a lot of people out there like, oh, add more calcium, add more eggshells, add more milk, add like, Epsom salts, like all the
Don't do
things,
that.
right?
Don't add the milk. Don't add the eggshells. So eggshells do not break down that fast. So if
I
if
know.
you like crushed up your eggshells and put them in the soil, they're just sitting there. It takes a long time for eggshells. Even if you put eggshells in your compost and they've sat there for 7 years, and you go back in that compost and you dig your compost out, you're gonna see your eggshells. They don't disintegrate. It takes a long time. So to do eggshells is just for your own peace of mind, but it's not doing anything.
Yeah.
Um, Instead, just water your soil really
Water the
well.
soil. And do you
Water.
fertilize with every watering or do you just fertilize once a week?
I don't fertilize anymore. So
Oh,
I
okay.
fertilize the planting hole. And because I top my
Oh,
beds with compost, I
okay.
top my beds with compost at the end of the growing season, whether
Hmm.
it's like a sheep manure, a garden compost, or I do worm castings. And then it sits all winter. And then next year I fertilize the planting hole and I don't fertilize again. my garden is so big that if
Yeah.
I went around with some kind of sprayer every week and did that, I would have no time to do anything else. You know, it
Yeah.
takes ages just to water the garden. I barely water it. Like I water my tomatoes because I need to, but if we have rains, I'm good. I make sure that the things that need water get water, but not everything does. And once everything is established, it's fine. It's just that transition. Now, if you're growing in a pot or you're growing in a smaller container, they tend to dry much quicker. They do dry much quicker, especially in heat.
Mm-hmm.
So those need to be watered once to twice a day. So if you're growing tomatoes in a pot on your deck, by the time the nighttime comes, even if you water in the morning, it's dry again. So you got to
Yeah.
water those twice a day. Especially if you're growing in plastic or a black container that's absorbing so much heat that the
Yeah.
soil, those pots produce much easier blossom end rot. But I
Okay.
grow in a raised bed. My raised beds are deep. They receive a lot of moisture, and they don't usually get blossom end rot because they receive water. So
Mm-hmm.
watch what you grow it in. A small raised bed, like little ones that they have for your deck. I think they're pots more than raised beds. A raised bed
Yeah.
is a big structure with a lot of soil, right?
Yeah.
But a small little like cutie little veggie trugs and all that, those need more watering
More
because they get
water.
dry quick. And then
Okay.
you'll prevent blossom and rot.
Okay.
Yeah.
Excellent. That is great advice. We added a soaker hose to so we plant in the ground, but it's still not very deep. It's not because we have a pool, it's edged in concrete. It can only, go so far. And
Yeah.
so and my son, really the vegetable garden he started. So it's in his mind, it's his garden. So he will water it once a day and often I'm reminding or he's asking me, Mom, can you water it today? And now he's
Yeah.
working full time. So I'm going to be watering it. So I said to him, I think it needs more consistent water, like, the shocking it once a day and then it's not enough. So we did add a soaker hose. So I'm hoping that will help.
That will help. That 100% will help because if you shock the soil with water and you do a quick watering because you're busy and you don't know where that water is going. Is it rolling off the top and down the sides?
Yeah.
Is it how much did you actually give? Is it just a tiny amount? So the best way to check is to put your finger into the soil to your second knuckle. And if you feel moisture everywhere, then you've watered enough. But if you do that and it's dust, it's
Yeah.
dry, then you didn't water enough. So
Okay.
it's got to be to water properly. Soaker hose is great, or like an irrigation line or something,
Hmm.
because it's a slow release, which
Yeah.
allows that soil to slowly absorb the water and reach a deeper level in the soil. A quick watering is not going to work. It's always got to be slow. So in my garden, because it's big, and if I stood there and waited forever, I'd never get done. What I do is I don't have irrigation because it's too big. I don't never set it up. It's just too difficult in the space that I have. But what I do is I love my watering wand, and my watering wand has adjustments on it. So I set it on like a low type of, I guess, soaker type of level,
Yeah.
and I sit down on the bed and I just walk away and I work somewhere else, and then I move it over after 10 minutes. And so by doing it that way, I'm able to water deeply.
Hmm.
I'm also able to attend to any issues. I can keep an eye on my tomatoes. Maybe I'm going to be pruning off suckers, working, tying things up while I'm watering
Yeah.
and moving along. And I think that's how people should just take their
Yeah.
time
With
but
that kind of
it's
thing.
definitely, and soaker hoses, you can buy them at the dollar store now. They sell them
Yeah.
every inexpensive ones, right?
Yeah.
So if it's not, it doesn't have to be expensive. It's 7,000 square feet, it becomes complicated. But
Yes.
if you have a bed, it's not complicated.
Yeah.
You can
Yeah.
easily do something.
Exactly. And I think the benefit of that being a raised bed too, because ours isn't, when he does that fast watering, like how much of it is going into the neighbor's driveway behind us, that kind of
Where's
thing.
it
So
channeling? Where is it like
exactly.
pooling somewhere else? You don't know where it's
Yeah.
going. That's
Yeah.
a good
So
idea.
that's something for our listeners to really watch. Where does that water go? And even you could even test that out before you even put your plants in, right? Like give practice and kind of see, and is it getting deep? And what you said about your finger, I know because watering can be an issue even with ornamental plants that a lot of my customers grow. And especially when they've first gotten a garden, they're worried, right? About are they watering enough? And unfortunately, with ornamental plants, the sign of too much water is the same as a sign of not enough water, right? They look the same. So I recommend getting a wooden spoon, either an old one from your kitchen or getting a new one from the dollar store, and using that as like just as a marker and to see how deep is the water. And with
Yeah.
tomatoes, you don't have to go as far, but I think that's still a trick to have add a wooden spoon to your gardening tools, and that's a good way to kind of keep an eye, whether it's a deep plant, whether it's a new tree that you've planted, or a tomato plant, or a zucchini plant that you've planted. It's a good
Yeah.
way of monitoring, like, did I do a thorough enough watering? And then
Yeah.
I'm not because if you put it through and you come up with a whole bunch of mud and a lot of wet, then you've watered too much, right?
Yeah, yeah. I think that if you start by filling the hole with water before putting the plant in, I think you give your plant a really good head start and you don't have to worry about watering so urgently the next
Mm,
day. And we do the same thing in our perennial gardens here too. Whenever we're putting in a perennial plant, my gardener, she digs a big hole and then she puts a bucket, like a 5 gallon bucket of water. She fills that hole with water, lets it go in, then she puts the plant in. And at least that way, that much planting hole depth is watered below that. So
yeah,
you've got extra depth of water and you're not as worried about it trying to reach the plant's roots. If you just plant it into dry soil, then try to water from above, it's not going to have a chance to reach. You're going to have to let it run for a while. So that
yeah,
bucket of water, or fill the hole with your watering wand before putting the plant in, is a easy idea. And I really like to kind of do it when there's still water in the hole before it all drains away, like before it
ah,
absorbs. So
yeah,
that way it sucks into the plant's roots as well,
right
and it
away.
kind of helps to anchor the plant in place.
Excellent. Excellent. All right. Well, what else do you think? Like, do you have any other tips or other? We want to leave our listeners with another. Not what we're talking to, not to be afraid of beginning of May starting your seeds for tomatoes. And once they get into the garden, or do you have any other tips you'd like to share with them?
Well, make sure you harden them off
Ah,
before you put them in the garden. I know that seems, maybe some people be like, that's obvious, but some people it's not, because you
hmm,
think the weather is nice, and it seems okay, but like you have to watch that final forecast, the final frost date, and you have to watch past the final frost date. So don't put in too early, even though we're having nice weather now. You never know. Our
right.
climate is unstable. This is unusually warm now, but we could get a snow. We've had frost June 3rd, so you have to really watch
Yeah.
what's happening. And before you put them in, you want to make sure that you harden them off. And hardening off takes time. It's about 2 weeks in length, so you could start
Oh,
now, or
okay.
not now, but I would start
Yeah.
mid-May for putting out your plants, unless your final frost date is like May 20th. I don't know, depending where you're located, but give it 2 weeks before your final frost date. Start putting them outside, even nice days. Just bring them outside, let them have some sun, gently,
Right.
slowly, with protection. Put them under a covered, under like a covered porch, or somewhere where they're not
Umbrella. Like, could you set up the umbrella and yeah.
can set up the umbrella, because initially when they're sitting indoors, even if they're under grow lights, the sun is much stronger than grow lights,
Mm,
plus the wind, plus rain, plus all kinds of disturbance is a lot. So you give them some time, and every day you increase the time they sit outside in the open by an hour. By the week's end, they're in there most of the day, and then you can start leaving them overnight. If there's suddenly a frost coming, or the temperature drops below 10, I would bring them in, cover them again, because they don't like that cold. And
hmm.
even if you're buying them at the garden center, be aware of that too, because they're not putting them outside
Yeah.
generally when they're selling them to you. They're covered by a greenhouse,
Yes.
right?
That's
Very,
very warm, right? That's very
very
warm
warm.
and very
There's no
protected.
wind. There's no wind. There's
Yeah.
no rain blowing. There's nothing going. The wind's not moving sideways. It's not torrential. So again, you still have to you can't. I would not trust. Greenhouse grown tomatoes. They come from a much larger greenhouse. They go to a smaller, when they're from the supplier. Then they put them in their greenhouse. They look lovely, and they still need time.
Yeah.
Another thing I want to say too is you're better off getting a smaller plant from the greenhouse than one that is flowering. Sorry, the one that's producing fruit. So
Okay.
when you go and see the tomato plants, especially if they're indeterminate varieties, if they're determinate, you could pot them up a bit. They're going to stay small. But if they're an indeterminate, like a beefsteak, they're all indeterminate. Don't take the one with fruits on it, because it's sitting in a small pot. And those roots are stressed because all the energy is not going towards producing roots and leaves. It's going towards producing that fruit and ripening it, right? Creating all that energy. Then you're going to take that plant, put it in your garden, and it's like it's not as healthy because it's focusing its energy in the wrong place. You're better off taking a smaller plant. It'll be easier for it to adjust the soil. It's not putting its energy in the wrong place. It's putting its energy in growing, and then it'll grow and develop fruit in your garden. So don't be tempted by that expensive tomato plant with fruit. You're better off getting a smaller one. It will be much better in the long run. That's
Mhm.
my tip.
Yes.
Save your
Perfect.
money.
Save
Save
your
your money.
money. Save your
Get
money.
a better off getting a 4-pack of seedlings, tomato seedlings, than a big plant for $25 with fruit on it. Don't do that.
Yeah. And I think I noticed that last year that the garden centers very quickly went to that. Like they sold out of their cell packs and their 4-inch pots, and then they immediately went to selling these, 10-inch pots of tomatoes.
Yeah, and 10
Um,
inches is still too small for a tomato plant. So if
yeah,
it's making fruit in a 10-inch pot, that is a stunted plant. It's stunted. It's going to need time to,
yeah.
I'm sure that the roots too are all wound into each other and it's root bound. Like it needs,
Hmm.
that is not, I mean, if they're selling it to you in a grow bag and it's going to stay in a grow bag, it's a different story. But a 10 to 12-inch pot, that's still too small for a tomato plant. Their
Yeah.
roots are extensive. So I would not recommend it. It's a waste of
Okay.
money. Yeah.
Excellent.
Same.
Oh, well, thank you so much. I'm like crash course in growing tomatoes, and I always love
Excited? Aren't
chatting
you?
with you.
I'm so
I am
excited. I'm so
very
excited.
excited.
Wait.
Yeah, I know. We're counting down the days and the weather just needs to cooperate. But I do want to say, like what you talked about with the weather, I believe it was mid-May last year that certain pockets of Ontario had ice storms. And I know a good friend of mine in Lindsay, like their whole garden, ornamental and vegetables, they lost it all. uh,
Yeah,
you know, and so
worth.
we really are dealing with erratic weather. So the slower
Yeah.
we do this, there's no hurry, there's no rush. Take your time.
No, we're excited, right? We're
Yeah.
all very eager and we can't wait, but the time is there. You should not rush it because all the hard work you put into growing those seedlings, if you lose them because you put them out too soon, you were too excited, it's just not worth it. You'll still
Yeah.
get fruit. And if anything, you're going to stunt the growth of those plants. They're not going to produce fruit any faster because now they've experienced shock from cold. So just
Mhm.
wait, wait. I believe in patience. You'll always will get there. We'll just
Yeah.
get there. So
Excellent.
much better way to go.
All right. Well, thank you with that note. Patience, patience. And thank you so much, Julia, once again for joining me down the garden path.
Thank you again for having me. I'll be back
Oh,
anytime.
anytime. Excellent.